I've worked as a Vatican Archivist for nearly 8 years. It's not the kind of job people imagine it is. We don't sit around copying illuminated manuscripts with quills, and we're not deciphering Da Vinci codes. What we do is far more mundane and far more dangerous. We catalog the forbidden. We store the exiled. We contain the forgotten. Our department, known only in internal Vatican documentation as Custodia Subterranum, exists beneath the basilica, 3 levels down. The walls are stone, the air is always damp, and the light flickers like it resents being there. The archives themselves contain manuscripts too old to date, relics too dangerous to display, and records of things the Church has never spoken of. Not because they aren't true, but because they are. And we have rules. They aren't just policies. They aren't for safety. They're for survival. They are carved in Latin above every door, laminated on every wall, and whispered to every new archivist like a litany. I had to memorize them on my first day. We all do. There are 9 rules, and none of them are open to interpretation. Do not speak to the shadows that move. If the crucifix above your desk turns, evacuate. Do not read aloud from any document labeled D-Class. Never open the lead-lined drawer on level 7. If a document you scanned yesterday is gone today, do not try to find it. Do not answer if your reflection knocks. Always light the archive incense every 6 hours. If you see a monk you do not recognize, hide. If a bell rings after midnight, seal the archive and pray. We joked about them at first, of course. It's how we cope. New hires would bet each other to leave the incense unlit, or wave at the security mirror to see if it waved back. But after a few months, the jokes stop. The first time you see a door close by itself in a sealed room, or find your coworker frozen in front of a document they swear wasn't there a minute ago, or smell fresh incense in a hallway no one's entered, you stop laughing. The rules aren't superstitions. They're the only reason we're alive. Which is why what happened last night should have never happened. I was on the night shift with Matteo, a former seminary student turned archivist who'd been with us for almost 2 years. He was sharp, devout, and had a habit of humming Gregorian chants under his breath when he was nervous. We'd both gotten used to the rhythms of the place, the hum of the dehumidifiers, the clang of distant pipes, the deep quiet that settles around 2 a.m. like a blanket. It was 12:06 a.m. when it began. The bell rang. Just once. It was faint, like it came from several floors away, and muffled like it had been struck underwater. But we both heard it. There was no mistaking that sound. The bell referenced in Rule 9 isn't just symbolic. It's real. It's a massive, ancient thing chained behind glass in Subarchive C. It hasn't rung in recorded history. The case is sealed. There's no mechanism connected to it. It just exists. A reminder. I froze. Matteo looked at me. His face had gone pale. "Did you?" he started, but stopped himself. He already knew I had. We both stood in the corridor, the silence that followed that single chime stretching far too long. I wanted to say it was a trick of the air vents, a shift in pressure, anything but what it was. But then Matteo reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of parchment, unrolling it with shaking hands. I didn't even have to look closely to recognize what it was. It was from the lead-lined drawer on level 7, the one we are forbidden to open, the one no one has access to, not even Father Ilario, the head of our division. That drawer is always locked, double sealed, and alarmed. It requires 2 physical keys and a 4-digit passcode held by 2 different administrators. I'd walked by it hundreds of times, and it had never once been disturbed. I didn't open it, Matteo said before I could speak. It was already cracked open when I walked by, just a sliver. This was inside, just lying there. I stepped closer, careful not to touch the parchment. The writing was faded Latin, handwritten in brown-black ink. One phrase was underlined in red, Mundus calat, nomina, vetura. The world forgets the old names. The ink shimmered faintly, almost wet. My skin prickled as I stared at it. The hallway seemed darker somehow, like the shadows had swollen behind the lamps. "We need to seal the drawer," I said. "We need to log this and burn the copy. Now." Matteo didn't respond. He was still staring at the parchment like it was whispering to him. I reached to take it, but the moment my fingers grazed the edge, the overhead lights dimmed. Not a flicker, not a power surge, just a slow, smooth dimming, like someone was turning down a dial. And then our phones died, both of them. at the same time. Mine buzzed once, showed a screen full of static and went black. Mateo's did the same. Even our watches stopped ticking. Second hands frozen mid-sweep. That's when we noticed the incense. You can always smell it in the archives. It's a mixture of frankincense and myrrh, blessed, ground into powder, and burned in small bronze urns. But we hadn't lit any recently. It should have faded hours ago. And yet, the air was thick with it. Fresh, sharp, burning. I turned toward the central control station, ready to check the surveillance feeds. That's when I heard it, the whispering. It was soft at first, like someone praying in the next room, but it grew louder, rhythmic, chant-like. Latin phrases I recognized but couldn't quite translate in the moment. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, through the stone walls, through the vents, even from behind sealed archive doors. Mateo backed against the wall. "This is it," he whispered. "We broke the rule. The bell rang, and I read it. We're past the line." I wanted to argue, tell him we could fix it, but I couldn't lie to him, not when I felt it too. Something had shifted. I pulled the emergency keycard and rushed to the central control room, swiping through multiple sealed checkpoints. The cameras were still online, but several feeds were corrupted, glitching, full of static, or showing distorted shadows that didn't match the architecture. And on 3 separate monitors, I saw someone. Not clearly, just a robed figure, standing motionless in the background of 3 completely different sectors of the archive, always at the edge of the light, always still. I hit the intercom. No response. I called up to the security office. Line dead. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The bell cam. It showed the display case, as expected. But now, the glass was cracked, a thin fracture down the middle, as though someone had struck it with a hammer. The chain wrapped around the bell was hanging loose. Mateo was right. We'd broken a rule, and something had woken up. Didn't realize I was holding my breath until my vision blurred. The sight of the cracked bell case paralyzed me. For decades, that bell had been a relic, inert, ceremonial, locked behind an inch of tempered glass and centuries of superstition. Now the chain was hanging limp. The crack running through the glass gleamed like a wound under the cold glow of the security lights. Behind me, Mateo was whispering something, pacing. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew that tone. Not prayer, not pleading. Desperation. Like he was trying to convince the air itself that what he'd seen hadn't happened. I backed away from the monitor, checking the hallway feed. Camera 5, the outer corridor of Sub-Archive C, flickered with static, a brief stutter, and then, for a fraction of a second, it showed something that should have been impossible. The monk, just a glimpse, brown robes, a bowed head, bare feet, standing perfectly still in the center of the hall. His face was obscured by shadow, but his presence froze me like a held breath. I blinked, and the image glitched. When it returned, the corridor was empty, but I knew what I'd seen. There are no monks on duty. No religious personnel are authorized to enter the lower archives at night. It's part of the containment protocol. And even if someone had slipped in, that hallway is sealed from both sides with biometric locks. So how the hell did he get there? "Mateo," I said, turning around. "We need to go, right now." But he wasn't listening. He stood facing one of the archive room doors. Trembling, I followed his gaze. The crucifix above the doorway was turning, slow, counterclockwise. The motion was steady, unnatural, like it was pivoting of its own volition. Rule number 2. If the crucifix above your desk turns, evacuate. We hadn't written that rule as metaphor. It was dead serious. "Don't look at it," I said. "Back away. Don't speak to it." But Mateo was transfixed. Then I noticed something that made my stomach lurch. His reflection in the glass panel beside the door, it wasn't moving. Mateo was breathing heavily, swaying. But the reflection stood perfectly still, mouth open slightly, eyes wide, with something between terror and hunger. Then it lifted its hand and knocked 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. That was rule number 6. I grabbed Mateo's arm and pulled him away, practically dragging him down the corridor toward the emergency stairwell. He fought me at first, screaming that it was just a hallucination, that none of this was real, that he'd never opened the drawer, never read the parchment. But we both knew he had. We barreled into the stairwell and slammed the security bar behind us. The lights flickered overhead, and for the first time in my life, I heard something coming from below. Not footsteps, chains. heavy, deliberate links scraping across the stone. The sound echoed up the stairwell like a warning. Something was climbing. We went up instead, heading for the reliquary containment level. It was the closest floor with reinforced doors and blessed enclosures. If something had been released, something old, maybe we could hold it there, at least for a little while. As we reached the top of the stairwell, Matteo slumped against the wall, gasping. He looked pale, almost gray, and his eyes had gone glassy. I slapped his cheek gently. "Stay with me," I said. "We need to lock this place down. I'll call the surface watch. They'll send someone." But he didn't answer. His gaze drifted downward, and I followed it to his chest. The parchment he'd taken had reappeared. Somehow it was tucked into his jacket again. I was sure he'd left it behind. He'd tossed it on the floor before we ran. Now it was back, folded, edges frayed and curling as though burned. And on it, beneath the Latin phrase, something new had appeared. Written in deep red ink, or something thicker, was a symbol, a circle surrounded by 9 smaller marks, and in the center, a key, pointed downward. I'd seen it once before, in a photo buried in the Vatican's off-record archives, from a monastery that no longer exists. The symbol of the 10th mouth. I grabbed the parchment, but the moment my fingers touched it, pain shot up my arm. Not just heat, screaming, searing fire. I dropped it, but the pain didn't stop. It pulsed through my veins like acid crawling up my shoulder. Matteo began to chant, low, barely audible, but continuous. It wasn't Latin. I've heard dozens of dead languages, but this wasn't one of them. It didn't sound like anything spoken by human tongues. It was wrong, the cadence off, the sounds wet and distorted, like something trying to imitate speech from behind a layer of water. I backed away. "Matteo, stop." He didn't. I activated the emergency glyph lock on the stairwell door. A last resort. Once sealed, it can't be opened without authorization from the papal secretary. A faint hum filled the air as the relic-based protections activated. The hallway felt momentarily warmer, safer. But Matteo stepped forward, and the glyphs dimmed. That should have been impossible. He reached out, eyes locked on me, but they weren't his eyes anymore. Something inside him had hollowed out the man I knew and left a mask behind. A mockery. His mouth opened, and for a second, I expected him to scream. Instead, he smiled. Then he whispered, "He heard the bell. He remembers his name now." And the lights went out. I don't remember what happened next, only fragments. Stone corridors shifting around me, shadows moving independently of their sources, the sensation of being watched by something behind my eyelids, the sound of chains always closer, always circling. I came to sometime after 3 a.m., lying in the antechamber near Subarchive B, alone. My comm badge was melted, my emergency rosary had turned black, and Matteo was gone. No blood, no scream, just gone. When I made my way back to the control room, the feeds were all dark. The crucifixes above every door were missing. Not fallen, missing. No damage. Just space where they should have been. And carved into the wall, beneath the 9 rules, a 10th, etched in the same script as the forbidden parchment. Fresh, wet, like it had been cut just minutes before I arrived. 10. If one of us is taken, do not search for them. They are no longer alone. I sealed the archive from the inside. I'm writing this now on a disconnected terminal. There's no signal, no backup power beyond what's left in the emergency reserve. But if someone finds this, if you're reading this from outside, know that the bell did ring. And once it rings, he remembers.